Okay, ready for this. We're going deep into some declassified CIA files today.
Ooh, sounds interesting.
But not just any files. We're talking about their research into psychic spies.
Psychic spies?
Yes, psychic spies. You heard that right.
That sounds like, something out of a movie.
It does. It really does. It sounds wild, but this really happened. The CIA had a whole program dedicated to investigating something called remote viewing.
Remote viewing.
So basically, the ability to gather information about a distant target just using your mind.
Wow. I've heard of that, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, so think Cold War espionage.
Oh.
Imagine being able to spy on enemy installations, military movements, secret meetings,
Yeah.
all without ever leaving headquarters.
Oh, wow.
That was the dream, anyway.
That makes sense, like, given the time period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I could see why they would be interested in that.
Totally.
But did it actually work?
That's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from the actual CIA report evaluating the program,
Wow.
which was declassified a while back.
That's incredible.
And then on top of that, we're going to be looking at some analyses by some of the scientists who were brought in
Oh, okay.
to assess the research.
So we get to go behind the scenes.
It's like peeking behind the curtain of a real-life X-Files episode.
I like it.
So first things first, let's define remote viewing. What are we even talking about here?
Yeah.
So the report describes it as the attempted perception of information about a remote target using means other than the normal senses.
Okay.
So it's not like seeing or hearing.
It's something else.
It's something totally different.
Something beyond our normal understanding.
Exactly. And the CIA had three main goals for this research.
So
First, they wanted to prove that this was real, that remote viewing was a real phenomenon.
okay, so no more just stories and speculation.
Right. No more anecdotal stories. They wanted hard evidence.
Okay, that makes sense. You can't build a program on something that might not even exist.
Exactly. Second, if it did exist, they wanted to figure out how it works.
Okay, so the mechanism.
Yeah, the mechanism, like what's going on here? Is it some unknown energy wave? Is it some kind of sixth sense that certain people have?
Right.
Like they wanted to understand what's going on.
Okay, so go beyond just observing it, but try to explain it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And their third goal was to figure out how to make it more accurate and reliable.
To develop techniques.
Basically, yeah, to train up their psychic spies,
Okay, so they're taking a very operational mindset here.
Totally.
Interesting.
Now, to evaluate this program, they brought in a team of experts, including like some big-time statisticians, to analyze the data.
Okay.
They wanted to make sure that the research was as scientifically rigorous as possible.
Makes sense.
But it's also interesting, they brought in a skeptical psychologist,
Oh, really?
Dr. Ray Hyman.
I've heard that name.
Yeah, to provide like a counterpoint to some of the more, enthusiastic proponents of remote viewing.
So they wanted to have like a balanced perspective.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure they weren't just surrounding themselves with believers. They wanted to have someone who was going to be like, hold on, what's really going on here?
I like it.
And one of the key tools they used to assess these experiments was something called effect size.
Okay.
So this basically measures how strong the results are
Right.
compared to just random chance.
Okay.
So if the effect size is large,
Yeah.
it means that it's unlikely that the results are just due to lucky guesses.
Right.
And get this, in some of the lab experiments, they actually did find statistically significant results,
Oh, wow.
meaning that the remote viewers were scoring hits
Okay.
above what you'd expect from chance alone.
That's interesting. So they're finding something in the lab.
They are.
Yeah.
But if they were getting these positive results in the lab, then why was the program eventually shut down?
Yeah, that's a good question.
There must be more to the story.
There's got to be.
And there is. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
One of the big issues that was raised by Dr. Hyman, the skeptic, was the problem of replicability.
Ah, replicability.
He argued that while some individual experiments might show promising results, those results weren't consistently replicable across different labs and researchers.
Right, that's the cornerstone of science, right? If you can't repeat an experiment, you get the same results, then it kind of throws the whole thing into question.
Yeah, exactly. Hyman also argued that it was extremely difficult to isolate the supposed phenomenon of remote viewing from other potential explanations.
Okay.
For example, could some of those hits have been due to unconscious cues from the experimenters?
Right, so maybe the experimenters are somehow influencing the results without even realizing it.
Exactly. Or maybe the viewers had some prior knowledge about the targets that they weren't even aware of.
So they're tapping into something else.
Yeah. It's like trying to solve a magic trick.
Okay.
Something amazing just happened, but figuring out how it happened is the real challenge.
Yeah.
And there was one type of experiment in particular that generated a lot of debate, the Gansfeld experiments.
Ah, yes. The Gansfeld experiment.
These were specifically designed to test telepathic communication.
Okay.
So in these experiments, you'd have a sender who's trying to transmit mental images to a receiver who was in a sensory deprivation chamber.
Oh, wow. So like a dark, quiet room.
Yeah, dark, quiet room, white noise playing, designed to block out all external distractions.
Okay.
And the idea was that by reducing sensory input, the receiver might be more receptive to these telepathic signals.
Interesting. It's fascinating how they try to create these very controlled environments.
It is. It's like how do we isolate this?
Yeah.
How do we figure out what's really going on? And the results of these Gansfeld experiments were mixed. Some researchers claimed to have, achieved significant results, suggesting that, telepathic communication might be possible under these very specific conditions.
Right.
But others argued that those results were still not consistently replicable.
Okay.
And that there were potential methodological issues that needed to be addressed.
So even with these carefully controlled experiments, the question of whether telepathy or remote viewing is real remains open for debate.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And as we'll see, moving from the very controlled environment of the lab to the messy, unpredictable world of actual intelligence gathering introduced a whole new set of challenges.
Right, because the real world doesn't play by the rules of the lab.
Not at all.
Okay, so did they actually try to use remote viewing for real-world espionage?
Yeah, what happened when they took it out of the lab and into the field?
I'm hooked.
I know, right?
So did they actually try to use remote viewing for real-world espionage?
Yeah, what happened when they took it out of the lab?
And into the field, yeah.
That's the million-dollar question.
I bet.
To answer that, we got to kind of shift gears here a little bit.
Okay.
From the controlled world of the lab to the unpredictable world of intelligence operations.
Yeah, less white coats and more shadowy figures, right?
Totally. Less sterile rooms and more high-stakes missions and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different ballgame out there.
Totally different ballgame. And the CIA report even acknowledges this. They say that moving from the lab to real-world application was a major hurdle for the remote viewing program.
I can imagine.
In a lab, you can control the variables.
Right.
You have clear targets, there's less pressure. But in the real world, things are much more complex and ambiguous.
For sure. I mean, it's just a different beast.
Totally different beast. Plus, the targets themselves are often shrouded in secrecy, which could make it even harder. For a remote viewer to, lock on to something.
Right.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But you don't even know what the needle looks like or where the haystack is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So to really understand how the CIA actually used remote viewing for intelligence gathering, we got to look to some interviews they did with the people who actually requested and received this information.
Okay, so we're getting, the user's perspective.
Exactly. The user's perspective, the intelligence analysts and officers who are,
The ones on the front lines?
Yeah, the ones on the front lines. And what's really interesting is these interviews reveal kind of a mixed bag of experiences.
Okay, so some people liked it, some people didn't.
Some people found it intriguing, while others were more skeptical.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it wasn't like a universal, this is amazing or this is bogus, but there was this one common thread that emerged from a lot of the interviews.
What was that?
The issue of vagueness.
Vagueness, you mean the information they were getting just wasn't specific enough to be helpful.
Exactly. Imagine you're an intelligence officer, you're trying to track down, I don't know, a suspected terrorist or something.
Okay.
You request a remote viewing session, hoping to get a glimpse of where this person is hiding, maybe some details about their plans, but instead the remote viewer comes back and tells you they see a tall building with lots of windows and something that feels dangerous.
Not exactly helpful.
Not exactly helpful, right.
Not a lot to go on there.
No, not a lot to go on there. And that was a recurring complaint from the intelligence users who were interviewed for this report.
Yeah.
They often felt like the remote viewing data, while sometimes interesting, was ultimately just too vague and too general to be of any real value in their operations.
Yeah, it's like getting a beautifully written poem about a faraway land,
Yeah.
but no map to actually find it.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Intriguing, but not super practical.
Right. And in some cases, the remote viewers even got things completely wrong, which, that further eroded confidence in the program's reliability.
So we've got vagueness, we've got inaccuracy, we've got a general lack of actionable intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any other kind of factors that contributed to the CIA's decision to ultimately discontinue the program?
Yeah. The interviews actually revealed several other challenges as well that plagued the operational use of remote viewing.
Like what?
So for one, the accuracy of the information, it was highly variable. Sometimes the viewers seemed to hit the mark, while other times they were way off base.
Right.
And there was no reliable way to predict when they'd be accurate or not.
Yeah, that's a problem. That inconsistency would be a major issue for anyone trying to make decisions based on this information.
Totally.
It'd be like having a weather forecast that was only right half the time. You never know if you need to, bring an umbrella or not.
Exactly. And another challenge was the reliance on subjective interpretation.
Go ahead.
The remote viewers' reports often included, a lot of symbolism and metaphorical language.
Okay.
That was open to multiple interpretations.
So it wasn't like getting a clear photograph of the target.
Yeah.
It was more like getting an abstract painting that needed to be decoded.
Exactly. And that decoding process introduced the potential for bias, both from the viewers themselves and from the analysts who are interpreting their reports.
Right. So if you go in with a preconceived notion, you might interpret the data in a way that just confirms what you already believe.
Exactly. And on top of all that, there was the issue of separating the remote viewing information from other intelligence that was already available.
Okay.
In many cases, the remote viewers were given some background information about the target before their session, which, that could have influenced their perceptions.
Right. So it's hard to know if they're really seeing it remotely or if they're just drawing on information that they already had.
Exactly. It's like, it's like trying to judge a cooking competition.
Okay.
Where some of the contestants were given the recipe beforehand,
Right.
and others had to just, wing it, improvise.
Right.
How do you fairly assess their skills if the playing field isn't level?
Yeah, you can't really compare those two things.
Exactly. And it sounds like the CIA was facing a real conundrum here, right?
Yeah.
Tantalizing hints of something extraordinary.
Yeah.
But also a lot of ambiguity, inconsistency, and that potential for bias.
Right.
That made it really hard to fully trust the information that they were getting.
It's like they catch a glimpse of something, but they can't quite grab it.
Yeah, and remember, this is all happening during the Cold War.
Right.
Where the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, for sure.
The CIA needed reliable intelligence to make informed decisions.
Yeah, they can't be messing around with maybes.
Exactly. And remote viewing, for all its potential, just wasn't cutting it.
It wasn't there yet.
Yeah, so despite the intriguing results they saw in some of the lab experiments, the real world challenges ultimately proved too great for the CIA's remote viewing program.
It sounds like it.
But before we jump to the final verdict here,
Okay.
we need to address one more crucial aspect of the program.
All right.
The question of replicability, especially in those later studies.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
By the independent research group SAIC.
But it's worth diving a little deeper into how they tackled this.
Because if the CIA was going to base any decisions or operations on remote viewing, they needed to be confident that the results weren't just flukes or, one-time occurrences. They needed to know that this phenomenon could be reliably replicated under controlled conditions.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about how the CIA put this remote viewing to the test in real-world situations. And it sounds like they hit a lot of roadblocks.
They did.
But before we completely wrap up here, let's circle back to those later experiments that were done by the independent research group,
Right.
SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation.
Yeah.
Those were specifically designed to tackle this issue of replicability, right?
Absolutely. Replicability, it's crucial in any scientific field.
Right.
But especially when you're dealing with something as extraordinary as remote viewing.
Right.
If you can't reliably reproduce the results, then it casts a lot of doubt on the validity of the whole thing.
It's like It's like trying to bake a cake from a recipe, you know?
Sure.
If you follow the instructions carefully, but you only get a delicious cake half the time,
Right.
you start to wonder if there's something wrong with the recipe itself.
Yeah, exactly. So the SAIC researchers, they designed these experiments with replicability in mind.
Okay.
They used rigorous protocols,
Mm-hmm.
statistical analysis,
Yeah.
trying to see, could they consistently get results that were above chance?
Yeah. Okay, so what did they find? Were they able to replicate those earlier positive results?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
In some of their experiments, they did observe statistically significant results,
Mm.
even when they implemented these very strict controls
Okay.
to try to minimize the possibility of cheating or subconscious cues.
So even with these extra precautions, some of the remote viewers were still scoring hits above what you'd expect just from random guessing.
That's right. And that led some researchers, including Dr. Jessica Utz,
Who is she?
the statistician who reviewed the program,
Okay.
to argue that there was something genuinely intriguing happening here, something that couldn't be easily dismissed.
Okay. But didn't the report also state that they couldn't definitively prove like
Right.
a paranormal explanation?
Yeah, that's a key point. While they acknowledged the statistical significance,
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't rule out the possibility
Yeah.
that other factors might be at play. Remember Dr. Hyman, our skeptic?
Yeah.
He remained unconvinced, believing that there could be methodological flaws or other unknown variables that were accounting for the results.
So even with these more rigorous experiments,
Yeah.
the debate continued.
It did.
You have compelling evidence, but then also the possibility of alternative explanations.
And that's pretty common in science, especially when you're exploring something as complex and controversial as remote viewing.
Right.
It often takes years, sometimes decades,
Yeah.
of research to really reach a consensus, if you ever even do.
Okay, so we have these intriguing results, some of which were replicated, but still no definitive proof of psychic powers.
Right.
What about the practical side of things? Did the CIA ultimately conclude that remote viewing was a useful tool for intelligence gathering?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And here's where the report kind of gets down to brass tacks.
Okay.
Despite those glimmers of statistical significance in the lab, CIA, they concluded that the operational use of remote viewing was not justified.
So no psychic spies saving the day.
Not quite.
Okay.
The report acknowledges that the research, it didn't completely rule out the possibility
Okay.
that remote viewing could be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Under certain circumstances, however,
Yeah.
based on the feedback from the people who actually tried to use it in the field,
Mm-hmm.
they determined that it was simply too unreliable
Okay.
and impractical to be a viable intelligence tool in its current form.
What were the main reasons that they cited for that?
Well, as we talked about earlier, the information that the remote viewers provided was often too vague and too general to be actionable.
Right.
Imagine getting a report that says, I see a large structure, possibly made of metal, somewhere in a desert. That doesn't really help you if you're trying to pinpoint the location of a secret enemy base.
Not at all. It sounds like they were getting more like abstract impressions than, concrete intelligence.
Exactly. And even when the information was more specific,
Yeah.
the accuracy was inconsistent, making it really hard to assess the reliability of the data.
So it was kind of a gamble. Like sometimes they get lucky, they get something useful, but more often than not, the information was just too vague or too unreliable to really act on.
Right. And then on top of that, there was always that concern about potential bias influencing the interpretation of the data.
Right.
Both from the viewers themselves and the analysts who were trying to make sense of the reports.
So even if we assume that there was some genuine phenomenon at play here, the subjective nature of remote viewing made it very difficult to separate the signal from the noise, so to speak.
Absolutely. And remember, all of this was happening during the Cold War.
Right.
Where the stakes were really high. They needed to be certain they needed to know.
Yeah, and remote viewing just wasn't providing that level of certainty.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so let's sum up here.
Okay.
The CIA invested a lot of time, a lot of resources into researching remote viewing, but ultimately they concluded that it wasn't a viable tool for intelligence gathering.
That's the bottom line. But I think it's important to note that even though the program was discontinued, the research itself, particularly those later studies conducted at SAI, they did contribute to our understanding of human perception and the complexities of consciousness.
So they may not have found their psychic spies, but they did uncover some intriguing data about the potential of the human mind.
They really did.
And the program also, I think, highlighted the importance of rigorous scientific methodology, independent replication of results.
Absolutely.
And a healthy dose of skepticism, when evaluating these extraordinary claims.
Right.
Those are valuable lessons that extend far beyond the realm of psychic espionage.
Yeah, they do.
They're essential principles for anyone who seeks to understand the world around us, whether we're talking about the mysteries of the human mind or the workings of the universe itself.
And for you, dear listener.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah.
Do you think the CIA was too quick to dismiss remote viewing? Or were they right to cut their losses?
Yeah.
And does this story make you wonder, what other mysteries might be out there waiting to be explored, even if they challenge our current understanding of reality?
If you're as intrigued by this as we are, we encourage you to check out the full CIA report and the research papers cited within it.
Absolutely.
You can find links to those in the show notes.
And until our next deep dive,
Yeah.
keep those minds open.
Stay curious.
And we'll see you then.